Greetings, this is I, Tentus Naravan Dracovin, Lord and Emperor of the Dracovin Empire, and welcome. It is time to continue my expose on the history of Magic the Gathering. This week, I'm introducing to you Urza's Destiny. Now, this was the third set in the Urza's block, the second small set, and the finishing out the Urza's block, completing it. It was released in June 7th of 1999, and it had its pre-release on May 29th of 1999. It had 143 cards in the set, and it continued all the things that it had before. It had Echo, it had Cycling, it had Growing Enchantments, it had Free Spells. It had all the same kind of things that had previously existed in the last Urza's blocks, but it also included some new things. It had Cycling from play effects, Creature enchantments, which were Growing Enchantments, Leaves play effects, and of course, reveal cards. Now, its symbol was a flask, of course representing Urza's continued experiments in order to defeat Phyrexia. This was the first and only set after Arabian Nights to have a single designer, Mark Rosewater, who was the one that designed the entire set. This was the first expansion under the new 6th edition rules after they had been published. So it did contain all the new rules changes. It included changing Summon to Creature now, so that appeared on all the cards, that major change which occurred when the rules changed. Now, there was a major mistake that occurred within the printing of the set. Included along with it in replace of the normal foils which had begun appearing in it, some of the foils were actually promo foils that were done by DCI or Arena. These versions of the promos shouldn't have been in packs, but they did appear there instead. So DCI promos and Arena promos began appearing among like Sarah Avatar here and a bunch of other. Now, it was released in 15-card booster packs with Emperor Crocodile on it, and of course it had 4 pre-constructed decks like they've had for a while. The official guide to Urza's Destiny was actually, in fact, written by one of the current, at the time, editor of the Duelist magazine. It was accompanied by the final novel in the Artifact series, Blood Ties. The pre-release card was a foil False Prophet. So the storyline of the set takes place, Urza's completed the Weatherlight, so now he's beginning a more genealogy, eugenics experiments in order to create the ultimate crew in order to man the Weatherlight, and also to develop a kind of engineered army to fight against the Phyrexians. Along the way, a student of his, Gatha, a student of the eugenics, basically goes rogue and heads off to the Keldans in order to experiment on them. Along the same way, the Phyrexians begin to develop the artificial plane of Wrath in order to be their primary staging grounds for their invasion of Dominaria. As I said, of course, it continued all of the normal kind of things we've been talking about with also the Urza sets, the keywords and mechanics, but it introduced a few new ones. First of all, it introduced reveal, creatures, and spells. Each of them were slightly different, but had different functions. A reveal creature you could use over and over again, tapping mana and using it. Reveal spell, of course, would be one time. Both of them functioned the same way as you would cast whatever spell or use whatever it would be. You would reveal a number of cards of the color appropriate to what it says on the reveal spell, and for the amount of cards you revealed to your opponents, that would be the amount of effects of it. Whatever numerical value would be based upon the number of cards you revealed. So the more cards you revealed, the better the effect you get. They also had a lot of abilities of creatures. When they would go into the graveyard from play, something would happen. This was for a number of creatures and for a number of enchantments that into the graveyard some kind of effect would occur. Now, Cycle was again also involved. I talked about, that they kept Cycle as a normal thing, but they had Cycle from play creatures, which when something would be in play, you could effectively, rather than have a keyword like Cycle, it would have an activated ability cost where you would effectively pay a mana cost, sacrifice whatever this is in play, put it into your graveyard, and you'd have an effect. So effectively, you could cycle it from play in order to get an effect. Now, the set had 4 cycles and 1 vertical cycle. The cycles were, of course, a set of growing creature enchantments. That they were enchantments you'd place on a creature, and like a growing enchantments from previous sets, they would grow in ability the longer they were out in play. They had a cycle of lobotomy cards. What this means is there had been a card lobotomy that you look at an opponent's hand, you reveal that card from it, you search their library, graveyard for it, remove all those from the game. The lobotomy cards, one of these lobotomy cards targeted a specific type of card, and then that person you'd remove that from the game, and you would also remove all copies of it from your opponent's hand, library, and graveyard, repeating that lobotomy effect. So there was a cycle of those. There was a cycle of the Scents. The Scents were common reveal instance that you would use, that each of the scents was linked to a different color. You'd reveal a color related to that, and an effect would occur. There was also the seers. The seers were the reveal card creatures that would go into play, that you'd tap some amount of mana, reveal a number of cards, and then another effect would go into play based on the number that you were revealing. The vertical cycle was a number of creatures that, as they would go up in power, but each of them would gain an effect when they would become enchanted. So there was a number of them that would get stronger. They actually went up in rarity. When they were enchanted, gained extra abilities. Now there was one reprint in this set, Ravenous Rats, and there was a functional reprint, Wild Kolos, which is effectively the same as Raging Cougar, which had previously been printed in Portal. Now the pre-constructed decks were a black deck called Assassins, a blue-red deck called Battle Surge, a white-blue deck called Enchanter, and a black-green deck called Fiendish Nature. And of course, the combo winter, which I talked about, did actually continue and end in this set, so it had sort of been tiding away at this point in time. And as I said, though I haven't shown them off a lot, there was, of course, continuing of cycling, continuing of echoing, continuing of free spells, and continuing, of course, sleep enchantments, and, of course, growing enchantments, which I did sort of talk about. Now let's talk about some of the cards from the set. There was Academy Rector. Whenever it would go into the graveyard from play, you'd remove it from the game, search your library for an enchantment, and put it into play. Carnival and Souls, an enchantment. Whenever a creature would come into play, you would lose 1 life, but get 1 black mana to your mana pool. Donate. You give control of target permanent you control to target opponent. Effectively are like, here you go, have this card I own. Elvish Piper. A 1/1 that you can tap with a green mana to put a creature card from your hand into play. Very powerful. There's Masticore. This creature, you have to choose to discard a card from your hand during your upkeep, or you sacrifice it. But for 2 mana, you do 1 damage to target creature, and for 2 mana, you regenerate it. Metalworker. This was an interesting version of effectively a reveal spell. You could tap it and reveal any number of artifacts for your hand, and you would get 2 colorless mana for each artifact that you reveal this way. So another interesting take on a reveal type card. There's Opalescence. Each global type enchantment that you have becomes a creature with power and toughness equal to its casting costs. So it changes all your enchantments to creatures. Opposition. You can tap a creature you control to tap an artifact, creature, or land an opponent controls. Effectively, you can tap your stuff to tap your opponent's stuff. Phyrexian Negator. It's a 5/5 trample that whenever it's dealt damage, you sacrifice a permanent for each 1 damage is dealt. So it's okay? Plow Under. You put 2 target lands on the top of their owner's library. So effectively you can put lands on top of an owner's land by force them to draw it. Or maybe you need them. There was Powder Keg, an artifact that during your upkeep you could put a powder counter on it. You could sacrifice it in order to destroy each artifact or creature with a converted mana cost equal to the number of fuse counters on Powder Keg. So you could target a certain amount of size. Replenish. You return all enchantments from your graveyard to play. There was Treachery. It was a free spell. When you came into play, you would tap 5 lands, you gain control of target creature. It's a free spell enchantment. Yawgmoth's Bargain. You skip your draw step, but for paying 1 life, you may draw a card. Aura Thief. A 2/2, when it goes into the graveyard from play, you gain control of every enchantment in play. Caltrops. Whenever a creature attacks, Caltrops deals them 1 damage. Covetous Dragon. A 6/5 flyer that when you control no artifacts, you have to sacrifice it. There's Eradicate. This was the black lobotomy, where you removed target creature from non-black creature card from the game, and then you search your opponent's library, hand, and graveyard for them, and also remove them from the game. There's Flicker. You remove target creature card from the game, and then put it back into play. A good way for a come into play abilities to repeat. Gameskeeper. If he would go into the graveyard from play, you remove him from the game, and then reveal cards from the top of your library until you reveal a creature card, put that into play, shuffle the library, including all those revealed cards. There's Goblin Gardener, a 2/1 that's put into graveyard from play. Well, then you can destroy target lands. So you could just attack people with Little Gardener, and they don't want to kill it. Goblin Marshal. When it's a echo creature, but it comes into play, and when it's put into the graveyard from play, you put 2 1/1 goblins into play. So, in fact, if you continue to cycle them into your graveyard and then get them back, you get a lot of goblin tokens. Heartwarden, a sort of step up from Llanowar Elves. It would tap for 1 green mana, or you could pay 2, sacrifice it to draw a card. So it had that in-play cycle ability on Heartwarden. Pattern of Rebirth. It was an enchant creature. When enchanted creature would go into a graveyard, its controller may search their library for a creature card and put it into play. Combine that with some of the cycling creatures were some of the best combos in this deck, actually. There was Rain, Academy Chancellor. She was one of those vertical enchant creatures. She had 2 abilities. Whenever a permanent you control is targeted by a spell or ability an opponent controls, you may draw a card. And whenever she becomes enchanted, you may draw a card. Rofellos, Llanowar Emissary. He was pretty good. He could tap and add 1 green mana to your mana pool for each forest you controlled. Sigil of Sleep. Whenever this enchanted creature deals damage to an opponent, you may return target creature to that player controls to their owner's hand. Taunting Elf, a 0/1 that all creatures able to block must do so. A lore creature in this day and age. There's a Temporal Adept. For 3 blue mana, you can return target permanent to its owner's hand. Tapping it, of course. Thieving Magpie. Whenever it dealt damage to an opponent, you may draw a card. Pretty good, because especially if you combine it with a way it can deal damage without attacking. Thorn Elemental. The 7/7 strike through. Effectively, when it would be blocked, you could choose to deal damage to an opponent if it was not blocked. Effectively, there's no way of preventing it from damaging you. Might as well block and try to kill it. And Thran Dynamo is here too. You could tap it for 3 colorless mana to your mana pool. A good artifact to produce a bunch of mana. Urza's Incubator. When it comes into play, you choose a creature type. All spells of that type cost 2 colorless less to play. This meant when tribal spells came out, they were actually affected by Urza's Incubator just by the wording on it. Pretty good there. Wake of Destruction. Destroy target lands and destroy all lands that share a name with it. So effectively, if you're doing a basic land, you could wipe out all of one type of basic land. If you're doing a non-basic land and they have a couple copies of it, same way. Wall of Glare. It can block any number of creatures. Combine that with something that prevents it from being killed or gives it regeneration, and you have a big blocker on hand that can prevent any ground forces from affecting you. Yavimay Elder, a 2/1 that when it goes into the graveyard from play, you may search your library for 2 land cards and put them into your hand. And he also had the cycle from play ability to sacrifice him, draw a card. So you could get 3 cards very easily out of this 1 creature. So that's it for today. I introduced you to Urza's Destiny, the last sort of set in the Urza's block that represented the waning of the Combo Winter and an increase of power level, though, of Magic sets that hadn't been seen up until now, that caused a lot of banding within the sets that, still exist today if you're playing that block. But regardless, it introduced some more interesting abilities, building upon the abilities that had already existed in the Urza sets up to now, and showed that it evolved the rules based upon the 6th edition rules that were now the core of them. So if any questions, comments, anything you would say, anything you think I left out, please leave in the comments below. Please like, share, and subscribe. Shows support the channel, the Empire, and the work I do. If you want to show some extra support, you can check out my Patreon, link in the description below. Of course, as always, please remember to check out my fellow Magic the Gathering channels, Card Bazaar, They Said, We Said, and Tasty Snackies. Of course, I'll have links to them in the description, or you can find them on the main page under Allies of the Empire. Please remember to check them out, too, for other great Magic content. But regardless, until the next time, I bid you farewell.